Since this is a work session, I'm going to call us to order. Still need to do all the formalities correct. Do you have anything you need to cover before I hand it over to him?
No, just main reminder, because this is a work session, you can't take any formal votes, but you can give consensus on the topics you discuss.
Well, so good morning, Al and Shauna. You want to take a minute to do some introductions and tell us if you've got anybody else with you here, and then I assume you have the same agenda flow that I have, and we really were going to hand it over to you guys and let you kind of take the lead, and then we'll contribute.
And Mayor, I think Interim City Manager Floyd Hartman is going to introduce Al and Shauna to you.
That's even better. Good morning, Mr.
Mayor
Hartman.
and Council. Thank you.
You're up then.
Yes, I would like to introduce Shauna Clark and Al Zelenka. They're with Baker Tilly. Baker Tilly obviously is a national firm, including offices throughout Texas, public sector advisory practice that specializes in working with local governments to accomplish their goals and objectives. They are both former city managers and have served in executive roles with cities the size of Amarillo or comparable cities. They both have experience with charter amendment process and working with city councils and governance and rules policies. But I'll let Al and Shauna take it from there, but I do want to come back quickly and have a comment from Councilmember Tibbs.
Yes, sir. So Al, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you now, Mayor.
Great. We're going to hand the meeting over to you and ask if you'd go ahead and do some introductions for us.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Al Zelenka. As Floyd had indicated, I'm joined by Shauna Clark, who is a subject matter expert in charters and governance policies, and working with her currently with another city. We're joined by Mary Losi and Dennis Hawkins. They have their cameras turned off. They're just going to be observing and listening, but they'll be assisting us on this really important process on both items and assisting you every step of the way. Mayor, do you want me to just jump in and get started?
Al, if
you
we
don't
can.
mind, I have one thing I'd like to address. This is Floyd. I'd like to address one thing before we move further. So Councilmember Tibbs is not here today, but he submitted a question that he'd like for me to address. I'll just read the question, and then I'll provide the answer, and we can discuss it quickly. And it's related to the procurement of Baker Tilly for this project. Okay. Councilmember Tibbs would like a discussion regarding the firm acting as a consultant on these and future meetings concerning the city charter, governance, and ends policy. He noticed on the rolling agenda that the contract is for $49,975. He indicated he seems excessive. He has not seen the contract or the services offered. I believe we would need a consultant and attorney well-versed in municipal law guiding us as we navigate these changes. But he also feels the need for good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Did the person making the decision inquire other firms and attorneys as to fees, charges, or services for these? Were there any other options considered? So the procurement process I managed it directly myself due to the timetable of getting a consultant on board. I managed that procurement in compliance with the professional services procurement of the state of Texas. I chose to proceed with management experience over the other disciplines because my expectation, what I heard, was that we wanted a broad view and range and the ability for somebody to give us advice outside of the traditional or the norms and how things might be different. The cost is very much in range with these typical. So under procurement law in Texas on professional services, the first thing that you evaluate is qualifications. And I looked at the qualifications of this firm, and they were very much qualified to do what we had identified as a need in the goals that I just described. Then you move to the cost. So you don't compare, it's not like a competitive bid where I compare cost to cost. The costs that they provided were very much in the norm for this type of work, including ours. I didn't do a direct comparison, but I did check some recent contracts for travel costs, hourly times, and those types of things. We did minimize the cost, obviously. Video conferencing was an option that we provided for multiple meetings to minimize that cost. Since the number is so close to 50,000, we're going to go ahead and put it on the agenda for transparency. Under the law, it could be signed by the city manager at $49,975, but for transparency, for our public's benefit and for your benefit, we're going to bring it forward on the next agenda to vote on. So I'll leave it at that, and if y'all have questions about that, just let me know.
Okay. Mr. Hartman, we appreciate you reading that, and we wish Mr. Councilman Tips would have been able to be here. He's unable to be here, but I know he also had one other item that when it comes to that point in the discussion, we'll have you read that as well.
Yes, there's some additional questions related to the charter and the governance and ends that I'll bring forward.
And then, Al, let me ask you, if you don't mind clarifying for our public the scope of work here for your 49K. Do you mind running that down as to kind of what our expectations should be from your firm for what all this includes?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the question. And we are very, very, very mindful of the public tax dollar that's going into this project. And we understand any and all questions that surface related there too. The important thing for Shauna and I are working, as I mentioned, on another city's project for just charter amendments alone, not governance policies. And just for reference sake, and every city's different, so we're not comparing, but we're in the vicinity of 3 times this amount because of the very elongated nature and open-ended nature of the charter review process in this particular city. As the interim city manager said, this process is very time constrained, very intense, very focused, and so we did our best to prepare a scope of work that is as financially efficient as possible, and yet delivers the facilitation that we believe Amarillo needs. So the proposed work plan, essentially, we're going to be doing a full court press between now and the end of July, beginning of mid-August to get both the governance policy work completed as well as the charter review amendment work completed. So we have multiple activities in the proposed work plan. We gather background. We support the Charter Review Committee in all of its meetings that it will have doing the work on your behalf. And that's everything from attending the meetings to supporting the discussions and the research in conjunction with the city secretary and with the city manager. We will be documenting the work of the Charter Review Committee and reporting that work back to you as the council to keep you in the loop and keep you informed and keep the public informed. Ultimately, we will be working with your team to draft, assuming everything proceeds as typically does. We will be working with your team to draft an ordinance to order the election and the ballot language for any amendments that come forward. We will come to the council meetings when the Charter Review Committee, Citizens Committee presents to you its recommendations. And we're going to be doing this in a very intense, I believe it's almost weekly meeting rhythm to make sure that you as a city council, your direction is continued and followed in the manner that you expect. We will also be then taking the good work that this council did recently on your governance and ends policies, and we will be reviewing those for any additional best practices and thoughts that you, as a body of the city, may want to consider, and so that the alignment between your strategic pillars and milestones are right there with your governance and ends policies. And then lastly, we put in this because and the council can always take it out, but we saw an opportunity to provide some input in developing draft and updated mission and vision statements based on the work that you have done with your pillars, as well as the totality of leadership guidance that you have created. We thought that since we are going to be working with you over the next several months, take an opportunity to work with you to add value, additional value by updating any mission and vision statement work that you may want. So that's the scope of work in a nutshell, and happy to get into more details if that would be helpful.
No, sir.
Shauna, did you have anything to add?
Al, I think that's great. I appreciate the explanation. Shauna, I saw your mic turn on there. Did you have something you wanted to contribute?
No, I just realized my mic wasn't on when Al asked me that question.
I got you.
So I turned it back on.
Well, good morning. So on this, I'm expecting 4 to 5 Zoom-in meetings and a couple in-person meetings. Is that correct, Al?
Yes, we'll have I think a total of 8 or so, total eight plus meetings with the city. Yeah.
One thing that we are looking forward to is you guys have a point of reference from multiple charters, multiple cities. Some of them are going to be comparable to us. Some of them aren't going to be. And I think that's really going to be good in helping us navigate this. And so some of the expertise that you can bring on the recommendations, and then also some of the concerns that are naturally going to come up if we had a recommendation of, hey, let's grow the council. We feel underrepresented as 5 people. What does 7 look like? You're going to be able to look statewide and say, well, here's the risks in doing that, and then here's the benefits. And so if we forecasted a risk that wasn't real, then you would be the expert we'd be looking to say, no, that's not a concern. We don't have to worry about this issue or that issue. And I think some of those will come up in the conversations. The mission vision statement and the governance and ends, I think, is just council working hard to get our money's worth out of you. So while we've got you on the call or on the Zoom, we want to make sure we're covering as much ground as we can. So we'll be pretty effective and pretty efficient with your time here today. And then we think that the group of individuals that we have on the subcommittee, as well as the citizens, are going to do a great job. And I think you'll enjoy working with us. So the $49,000 comparatively, Mrs. Storrs, do you know, just off the top of your head, when we did our streets and roads and we had hired the consultant to come in for multiple meetings with citizens, do you remember how much that consulting fee was? I know I attended probably 8 or more meetings there, and that was a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'm just curious, just so Councilman Tips could have that, if we spent $150,000, $200,000 on a consulting fee on something like that, this puts this $49,000 in perspective. So I'd be curious, whenever you have time, if you could lend that to the conversation. Council, do y'all have any concerns? I know this was something that might have hit you in the way of it being $49,000, and it was something that Mr. Hartman could have just approved. But we're taking a minute to make sure that we are hitting the stewardship component of this. So does anybody have any concerns on the scope of work or what you're getting here for this money?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Al, it looks like you're up, man. I think we want to jump right into this and let's go to work.
All right, Mayor and Council, and so as I understand, you have put forth a lot of work already, and Stephanie and Floyd have gotten us up to speed, and we thank you for all that work. The first step in the process as we would recommend is that you as the body, I know that you've identified your recommended committee members for the Charter Review Citizens Committee, and with that, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this council can, if you have any comments or thoughts on the committee selection and organization, we would very much like to receive any of those thoughts.
Well, thank you for that opportunity, Al. I would just like to read publicly the names here that are appointed. So, Ms. City Secretary, in our previous meeting, we gave you names that you contacted. We gave you alternates, and you've contacted everybody on those. And then the names that are represented here today, have you released yet? Are those needing to be released today?
So, Mayor, when we talked last, we talked about we would reach out to everybody and we'd bring back a final list for your blessing at this meeting. Mm-hmm. We have released the 15 to someone that asked for it. Mm-hmm. And so those were the 15 that were discussed during the last council meeting. We have not released this list yet. Donna in my office, who's amazing, reached out to all of these individuals with the exception of the 2 put forth by Councilmember Tips because he wanted to reach out himself. And so the 10 that you have before you all confirmed that they do wish, they're willing to participate and volunteer their time, and they are able to commit the time to this project. And so if council gives consensus today, then we would be happy to put this list out to the public as our committee.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read aloud the names just because I know one of my recommendations was Michael Ford, who had contacted me and said, you know, my plate is full, I've got some consulting work, and so I can't. And so as the mayor, I recommended Mrs. Donna Ward and Mr. Michael Hanning. Both of them will participate. Councilman Simpson put forward Gary Pittner and Ms. Frida Powell. Councilman Sherlin, Ms. Kim Benson, and Toby Hudson. Councilman Tips, Rodney Hill and Dean Crump, and Councilman Kraft, Sandra McCart, and Audrey Castillo. So these are a good group of citizens, fairly diverse, a lot of different backgrounds, some with extensive expertise. And so, Al, do you have anything that you need on any of this to move forward with this committee?
Not specifically. We assume that at the first committee meeting, the members will self-select a chair and vice chair, and we will review with that committee the schedule of activities and the kind of the rhythm of the committee coming out of this meeting with the city council, so that the issues that you've identified, the committee will do its work on your behalf.
Real good, sir. So, Ms. Secretary, do you have some dates already committed to that we could look forward to, and just setting some expectations of when you think this committee will first meet and for the duration?
Yes, we do. And I won't go too much into that. I think we have that later on the schedule for today. But the first meeting we have planned is May 30th to kick off. And then we are looking at every Thursday for about 5 weeks to go through. And so, and we'll work with Al and Shauna and adjust that schedule as we need to, and be flexible with schedules of our committee members.
Right.
So,
thank you, ma'am. Council, anybody have anything they need to discuss or redirect on the appointment of these committee members?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, Ms. Secretary, I think you're good to move forward with what you have.
all right. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So, Al, we're going to hand it back over to you. I would like to get into a little bit of the scope that you're being directed to go through. Make sure you have a good, comprehensive understanding of the charter, the age of the charter, the size of the council, the growth of the city of Amarillo, the future growth that's expected as we go from 210,000 residents to 250. and what we're planning for the future. So do you feel pretty up to speed, educated, and do you have any questions for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Floyd and Stephanie provided us with some great background. We watched some of the prior council discussion on the charter topic, as well as the governance and ends policies. So we feel oriented. We've done other background research just to kind of get our arms around the basics. But what we'd really like to receive from the council is any, and I would defer to you on the order and the sequence, Mayor, but we'd really like to receive from you any specific issues that are on the minds of the individual council members or questions you have, so that we can be just up to speed on the current pulse of the council.
That sounds good, Al, and you and Shauna jump in with any questions, or especially if we move past something that you want to go back to, we can always revisit anything as we go. I think there's two forms we could work here. We could literally take the charter and go page by page, article by article, and just ask, council, you got any direction on this? I don't think that's as productive. I also don't think that's necessarily the call of this meeting here today. I do expect our committee members and our subcommittee to be able to do that, literally line item by line item. So you'll have that opportunity before it comes back to council. I think what we would prefer to do here today is bring forward some large issues that we feel like are going to be very well supported in the public, should pass a vote in November, and are things that we definitely see that would increase the effectiveness and the efficiency for what we're trying to do here. So as you go back to your mission vision statement, we haven't formalized this, but everything we've been working on with this council goes directly to the point that we want to restore and return the power back to the people and back to the voter. We want to have an elected representative government that truly is accessible. Right here on my left, I've got a great example in a good community leader in Councilman Sherlin, who puts himself on the second floor on a weekly basis to meet with citizens that some of them love him, and I wouldn't say some of them hate him, but some of them have a strong dislike for some of the things that they bring into his room. He hasn't moved back 1 inch, and he's continued to put himself out there as a servant leader that says, look, I work for you, I'm listening to you, I'm here to represent you, but I disagree here, or I agree there, or we could do better over here. So what you're seeing, I think, and where we need this charter to go is, how do we more so equip this council to represent the public as it grows? And how do we take the power from a few and a select few that love to have control and deliver that and disperse that to the citizens, so that we have a better dynamic all the way across the landscape of our city? So that being said, I think I'd like to go with place 1, and then we'll go to 2 with Floyd, and then 3, 4, and myself. We're going to go ahead and map out a few larger issues for you, and then see where that conversation takes us, Al.
That sounds great, Mayor.
All right. Council member place 1, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand it over to you and have you tell us what is on your list.
Yes, sir. So some of the things on my list are looking at 4-year staggered terms with extending the council to 7. Council appointment. Can you hear me, sir, by chance? Al?
Say that again, sir. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just a little bit muffled. I'm sorry.
Okay. So did you get the 4-year staggered terms with the extension to 7 council
Shauna,
members?
did you hear Councilmember Kraft?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to respond to that?
Give us 1 second here. I think the city secretary is going to swap microphones, maybe.
I'm going to move it closer. Al, let me know if you get any feedback when I do this, but if I put it up here, I think it'll pick you all up clearer. All right, try now.
Okay, Al, can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay,
Start over if you would.
you're good. So 4-year staggered terms with 7 council members. Look at the petition for recall. I feel that if we extend the council and terms to look at making an easier petition for recall for members to equip our citizens.
Okay.
Council appointment of city attorney. And then the only other thing on my list is just a general update across the board on the charter to bring it in up with state law. And that's all I have on mine.
Okay,
Thank you.
real good. Questions on that from you, Al or Shauna?
None from me.
I do not have any. Thank you, Councilmember.
I do want to take one quick second and make sure you guys understand the last 18, 20 years of turnover here. So, City of Amarillo has turned the entire council over and mayor 3 times now within the last 18 years. And so what that's doing is that's taking your good business sense of how you would run a board of directors, and you would not typically take your chair and all of your board members and ask them to leave, bring in a new chair and all new board members and take an organization and say, okay, let's start again. And you wouldn't typically do that every 6 years. There's no continuity for the things that have been built on. There's a poor handoff from, place to place. And so what it's doing consequently is I think it's hurting the ability to grow and to build upon good foundations that are laid by each council. And then what it's also doing on the good side is it's constantly having us recalculate and re-examine ourselves, which is good. But, exploratory surgery is not good for the health of an organization, right? And so if we're healthy and we're growing, maybe we don't cut ourselves open every 6 years and get a good look to say, hey, that actually is still working. So if we had something like this, I think it goes to the point of helping us grow as a city. So you guys are familiar with kind of what we've done historically here? Great.
A little bit.
Shauna?
I have a question. I understand the 4-year terms. Is the cause for the turnover that your council doesn't want to keep running for office every 2 years?
So
They just get burned out, or?
no, I think that's a good question. I think that we've had 2-year terms since the beginning, unless anybody wants to tell me if there's something way back when. But the 2-year terms has been proposed before to be extended, and I think the lack of trust maybe from the common public was the preventative measure that said we want you guys there longer. What it looks like on the face of it is, hey, that's great because if you're not doing a good job, we can always get rid of you. Right, and you have these recall issues that are pretty rigid. So, I mean, once you're here, it's difficult to remove you. So the public needs that trust that we would just acknowledge we don't have. But if we don't ever get ourselves to a change in term, then we either have to run every year to have staggered terms, or we stagger to like a 3-year instead of a 4-year, which could be a little bit better. But on the other side of it, it does put you in the position of you get onboarded, you spend 3 to 6 months learning, you work for 6 to 9, then you spend 6 more months campaigning. And so, what is your real effectiveness? It's a short period of time and a short window. And so, I think we could weigh the pros and cons there, Ms. Shauna, and get into a little bit of a discussion with you. What's your thoughts?
Well, I've seen this in cities that have 2-year terms where people just say, it's too much work, I'm not gonna run again. But I do know it's hard to go from 2 to 4 in any city. We looked at your recall, and your recall signature threshold is almost higher than your, how many people come to the polls and vote. So the signature threshold is high. And as far as 7 members, I think you should separate the 4-year from the 7 members and consider those separately, because there's 2 different issues here. The staggered terms, perfectly logical.
Questions for Ms. Shauna, council? Anything you guys want to contribute?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shauna. I think that helps. Let's keep cruising here. If we can, we're going to go to Mr. Hartman. Council Member Tips had sent a few things in that he had. If you don't mind giving us what his requests were or ideas are.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll just read what he submitted for the charter discussion. The only change I am proposing is a change to Article 5, Section 2. I would suggest terms for mayor and council be changed to 3 years. I would also suggest staggering the elections of the mayor and council to aid in continuity for the city and staff. 2 members of council and the mayor would be up for an election one year and then in the next, and in the next. Just 2 members of council. I believe 2 years is too short for a new member of the council to learn and settle in their role. His other comment was, I know there's been some talk about expanding the council to 7. I am against this expansion. I have been advised this opens the door for interference from the federal government. More research needs to be done on that area. So that's his comments.
Mr. Hartman, what's his specific concern in your conversation with him on adding the 2 council members?
Well, adding 2 council members, the discussion I recall was it relates to single-member districts and federal courts' decisions in the past related to that.
Okay, I think that's great. Al and Shauna, do you guys mind to discuss with us so we are 5 at large. I think you're hearing some beginning opening statements and discussion about adding 2 more at large. So nobody is discussing adding a single member district. What are your thoughts on that? What have you seen? Is there any risk in creating a single member district that would be harmful?
I've worked for cities that have gone from no districts to districts. And the districts create a lot more turnover than you're probably looking at now. That's why I said, please separate the 7 from the 4-year terms. To me, they're 2 different things. The problem is, when you get up to 7, a lot of times you end up with a 3-2-2 split on the council. And I work for cities with 7 council, and I work for cities with 5 council. The 5 council members seem to be able to push things forward faster than 7, in my opinion. So it's just from my experience that I'm sharing that with you.
What is I share your concern in a true single-member district. I think we could look down south in the DFW area. We could see how disruptive and dysfunctional it can be when you have a bunch of little kingdoms that are all in it for themselves, and there's not a true continuity. I would hate to have 15 members to try to wrangle. And so you are advising, it sounds more like that the 5, you don't feel like it leaves us unrepresented. You like the size of the council for the size of our city. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, from my personal experience, yes. The size of the council is good for the size of your city. However, I'm not in Texas, so I'm not sure, what the public demands are right now. If they feel they're not being represented, is this where the 7 council members came about, or the 7 came about? Is the community feels it's not being represented?
So I think,
what's the impetus?
Yeah, and I'll ask the council to jump in here and contribute to where their opinions are. I think for me, on the council member side, I've lived as a council member now and as mayor, and it can be very, very difficult when you have a smaller council like that, because you cannot You can't have a conversation with anybody more than one person. And so because of the small council size with the Open Meetings Act requirements, I think that can be difficult. The thing that I'm hearing from the citizens, I think, is we do a really good job, I think, right now of being accessible and available. But previously, I don't know that we did, and so as much. And I would say that I think a lot of the public has, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There's been a loud portion of the public that has pushed for like a single-member district because they're looking for greater representation. And I think my pushback is I don't think single-member district helps you in greater representation. Why would we not add more members to take on more workload, keep them all at large, and avoid that consequence?
Have you tested having the mayor have a 4-year term before all the rest of the council have a 4-year term? For example, having the mayor's term stand out and be 4 years?
No, and I actually would go the other direction. I think the mayor would stay a 2-year term. Being in a council member position and the mayoral role, I see the ability to direct traffic and the authority that's in that role. I think it represents the public a little bit better to keep them maybe on the hook every 2 years and then allow the council to run on 4-year terms. Thoughts on that, council?
I do have one question based on Councilmember Tipp's concern, because I'm not up to speed on this, but so I know in the past Texas fallen under the Voting Rights Act, which I guess was part of what would lead to these lawsuits that would force communities, if they were looking at doing any change, and I think for years that was the case here. But what is the current law, and cities that are looking to go at large, maybe increase in staying at large? Are they facing legal action? Do those same principles apply, and are they getting sued and being forced to change? Or is there something that's changed in recent history that is allowing that to withstand a legal challenge to remain at large, even if you're changing the size of a commission?
Stephanie or Floyd, could you or the city attorney weigh in on that legal question?
So I'll start on that. I think that's what Mr. Tips, Councilmember Tips, indicates, that there's more research needed in this area, and I agree with that. We don't have those specific examples, and I think as we go through this process, that's what we need to gather and bring forward. Brian, anything that you'd add?
What I would say is, because the city has been in lawsuits about this before, we do have research on it, and I would be glad to go into executive session and answer your question based on that. We could even do further research in light of the fact that this research is relatively old. Okay, we've had a couple of censuses since then. So, but I could give you some pretty good details on all of that. But because litigation is a possibility, I think it's advisable to go into executive session on that.
Just one question, and this is just a yes or no, but has the Voting Rights Act expired? I mean, is Texas, because, the part of that was, the certain southern states that have been accused of, and other states that have been accused of being disproportionate with their leadership, but I thought that had expired.
I could run down that research for you.
Okay.
And verify that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Simpson,
Would
thank
one
you.
of your reasons for going to 7 members to get a council that's more diverse?
Can you repeat
Would
that?
that be a goal?
Can you repeat that, Shauna?
Would one of your goals for going to 7 members be because you want a council that's more diverse?
I would say yes, in the way in which it allows for diversity in representation, not representation in diversity.
Got it.
And Mayor, if I may, it seems like with the growth of Amarillo, another perspective to consider is, at least in my experience, with both 5-member and 7-member councils, there's kind of been a rule of, it just works out this way, a rule of thumb that it's about a 30, for larger cities, because that's where I've been, about 30 to 40,000 people per council member seems to be the rule of thumb that, at least that I've experienced. And so, I think right now with 5 council members, 200,000+ at Amarillo, you're in that 40,000 range. So if you went to 7 and you're in that 30,000 range and you're growing as a city, you know, that's within that rule. You know, it's not a hard rule of thumb, but it seems to be that 30 to 40,000 range for cities above 150. That seems like there's a population to council member ratio of about 30 to 40,000.
I think that's a great point of reference. I've never heard that, and so we honestly don't know. I think on kind of where we stack up. I think we base it a lot on workload, the amount of emails, phone calls, and different things that we're trying to do, and then trying to be at large. So it can feel like way more than 30 or 40,000, I'm sure, at times. Councilman Sherlin, you had something you were going to say.
Yeah. I don't know why we should be scared of expanding the council. We belong to the people, and the people need to have a voice, and the more voices they can talk to, the better we can do. I mean, when you limit it to a certain amount of people, like what the mayor said, you have a workload. And it gets to a point that people need to reach out. And by us saying, well, 40,000 or whatever, to me, the more people that are represented by different councilmen, every councilman on this table and the mayor get phone calls from groups of people who they have relationships with. And the more people you include, the more representation that will be put forth. So in my opinion, I'm not for keeping it at 5. I'd rather see us grow. I would rather see us have more input from our community. With 7, we can do a lot more work than we're able to today. I know myself, I've double booked myself a few times. That it's because you have so much going on, you forget what you booked in already. So I think the more people that you spread the work with, the better off you are.
I appreciate that. Councilman Kraft, you got anything you want to contribute?
No, sir.
Okay. So I think we've understood maybe where TIPS is, right? I think we're given a direction to research some of the legal issues. Would love to get some of those hard facts back. If there is an expiration, we'd want to know it. If there's a risk here, we'd want to know it. And then I think it's up to the committee to help us evaluate and weigh that risk. Let me go to Councilman Sherlin next. Would you be willing to give us your items?
Yes. First thing I had marked here was in page 1 of our charter, and it has to do with annexation. I put down here we need to check state law and make sure where we stand on that issue. Then I've got marked up in section 2, terms of office. I'd like to see us discuss the length of time there.
You have a recommendation, sir?
Yeah, I'd like to go to a 4-year term.
Okay.
Staggered, of course.
Okay.
Then in section 5, elections, I would like to see we just need to go through that whole thing. Mayor, 4 council members shall be designated. I'd like to see us go through that whole area. Then in section 8, I would like to see us change election day from odd years to even years in November. Then in section 12, part B, what I got, the mayor or the city council hereafter provide may call special meetings. I would rather see, I think the city manager could go to the mayor. I think the mayor should be the one who calls meetings. And we should have a good enough working relationship between our city manager and our mayor that they need to have that discussion instead of either one of them calling a meeting. I think, okay, I've got a question mark on section 17. I just got a big question mark there. So I'd like to look at that whole section, section 17.
Give us just a general update.
Yeah, it's the ordinance publication. Penal ordinance may be published by publishing the caption only as provided by the law of the state of Texas, or such penal ordinance may be published by publishing the whole ordinance. So I just like to look at that a little bit closer.
Okay.
And then in section 21, I wrote out to the side, and this has to do with the powers of the city manager. I wrote define out there. We need a little bit more definition, I think, in some of these. They're very broad-based. Then in section 29, I've got a question mark on contracts. It says all expenditures, purchases, or contracts for supplies, material, equipment, public printing, public improvement, public works should be let on written, sealed, competitive bids in a manner prescribed. Now, I don't think we do that at all anymore. I think we need to, I may be wrong, but I think we need to look at the process there and the reasoning, because I don't think we do written sealed bids too often, do we? Floyd, do we do those? Or, from what I can tell, it looks like we go buy from the group mostly.
Well, there is a number of written sealed bids that are procured, but we do use the buy boards. So there are different procurement, and this is the difference between current state law and past state law in the procurement.
Okay.
So it does need to looked at to be updated and
Okay.
make it consistent with what current practices are.
That's what I saw in that one. I think that's about all I've got.
Okay. Can I ask Al, looking at a November ballot, I think some logic and some wisdom lends itself to the voter being able to willingly participate in 3, maybe 4 items. So if we list 20 items, what is your recommendation on general housekeeping updates that need to become compliant with current state law? Is there another avenue, like our governance and ends policies, that help us do that with an age charter? Or do you see the consideration of having too much on the ballot where you're not actually getting done what you need most?
Yeah, and I'll let Shauna also weigh in on this, but it's been our experience that, to your point, if you get much beyond 3 charter amendments, it really turns the voters off to really investing the time to really understand them in order to weigh in. There's a propensity for a no vote when you get too many amendments. So I think that's a very wise observation that you have. Shauna, did you want to add to that?
I completely agree, and I have a question. Do you have a citywide election coming up May of next year?
Yes, ma'am.
I know that putting the 4-year terms in the 7-member council off to May would not be a good idea. But how about taking all the housekeeping items and just using May as your target for getting those on the ballot?
So, Mr. Hartman, what do you mind to lend to that? Because I see the benefit here in, when you're running a campaign, you're running for office, but a lot of these items are going to be policy, procedure, more general updates.
I think it's a very good idea, worth the discussion of the committee and the council, to look at timing of the election versus the subject matter. And so I think that is a very positive thing to have on that discussion for them. I'm not aware of anything that would prevent that from occurring.
So I would ask for clarification, and I think I know the answer, but I just would like to hear it said aloud. So you put something on the ballot for a charter amendment, and the general understanding is, well, you can only amend your charter once every 3 years, right? And so let's talk in specifics. You have something that fails in November. It doesn't prevent you from having a charter amendment in May, as long as those two topics are unrelated.
I'm going to let Brian. Brian, would you weigh in on that? That if it's an unrelated topic in May, it can still go if something else failed in November.
If it's not amended, yes.
Okay.
So let's clarify amended. You have several sections, chapters. So we would not amend section 29 because we wouldn't put it up. And so something fails. Let's say we try to extend terms from 2 to 4 years, fails. So that section failed. You are clearly stating that the other sections are up for an amendment in May.
No. If you amend any part of your charter, then the moratorium runs.
Okay, so Shauna, do you mind to weigh in on that?
I see what you're saying. So let me make sure I have this straight. If you amend any part of your charter in November, you have to wait 3 years to put it back on the ballot?
Yes, that's state law.
So any one part of the charter?
Yes, any part of the charter, if it's amended, then you have to wait to bring something else. If it fails, then you can bring
If it passes.
Yes.
Okay, I get it.
So
Yeah, I see the problem there.
So do we have any latitude or dispute or interpretation of this at the state law level? I mean, as much as we like to say state law says, what we've found out on council is it's a lot of interpretive layers of laws. And so I would like clarity, and if it is very clear, then we move on. But if it's not, you're saying if you have a successful amendment, you cannot amend the charter again in any form or fashion for 3 years.
Yes.
Only if you have a total failure. So if you put 3 things up, 1 passed, then you're 3 years before you could touch any of the document.
Yes, and we can bring that state law forward for you.
Yeah.
And we'll get you that information.
Might I ask a question about the housekeeping items? In general, when your charter is not in line with state law, does the state law prevail? Can you as a council say, this is what our charter says, but this is what state law says, so we're going to do what state law says?
I didn't understand the question.
So the question is, if you're not in compliance or in line with state law currently, is there an allowance, is there another avenue to bring a charter other than a charter amendment into compliance with state law?
No.
Say annexation is a good example.
Well, because the charter specifically says that the charter cannot, and you have state law that also says the same thing. Charter can't be in conflict with state law. If there's a specific state law provision that controls the matter, then it controls. So like I said, even if you have a charter provision that's contrary, it doesn't matter.
Okay. So our housekeeping
That's
item.
what I was, yeah. So as far as your housekeeping items, if the charter is not in line with state law, it doesn't matter. It's not your highest priority. It's how I think I'm hearing it, because you could, every time you take an action that may look like it goes against the charter, you can just say we're following state law.
And Mayor, to your question about the governance and ends policies, to what the city attorney and what Shauna has just been saying, is what you can do is keep a running tally of all of those areas of the charter that are not in compliance with state law, so that there is an embodiment of where things stand in those housekeeping items like annexations, so that for, as you use the term transparency, so that for transparency purposes, everyone's on the same page of understanding. So you could require that to be produced on an annual basis as part of the governance and ends policies.
I think that's a good point, and I appreciate the discussion on this because I think it needs clarity, and you step away from it and you have different conversations, and sometimes you just don't necessarily have it understood clearly in your mind what you're risking when you put forth an amendment. So that being said, I think that we have a good direction for this committee, maybe to give us two different bodies of recommendations. One that would be more geared towards things that don't comply currently with state law, they're not in line or updated, and that they need to go in the governance and ends docs. And then the other one, things that are being the authority of the charters oversighting and that we would want to recommend. Okay, let's keep moving. Councilman Sherlin, that was everything you had?
Yes.
Okay. Councilman Simpson, you're up.
Yeah, I don't know. I would add maybe a little bit of color to a couple of these issues. So I'm not so much about how we get there, but where we want to go. And for me, a couple of things, and they've kind of been mentioned, is but the consistency in council members and knowledge and length of stay. Again, when our current, with the ability to change every 2 years, there's not much of a learning curve to do that. So, I think that is a disadvantage of our current system. Also, it really it makes your leadership have to be much more political than maybe non-political and looking for the best of it, because you're facing an election every 2 years. So that may be good or bad. I think that's up for the commission to decide. But I think and if you look at, and again, I don't know what best practices are. We're the only elected officials here that are elected. I mean, the state house is elected on 2 years, but you have Senate that is elected every 6 years. There's a check and balance there. But if you look at commissions, school boards, even regents, I think regents are elected 6-year periods. So there seems to be some wisdom in longer terms, but I think that will be something. But I think that consistency and knowledge base sticking around for more than 2 years. The other thing that is, I think, a little bit concerning is the fact that a sole governing body can have a majority turnover in one election and in every 2 years. I think that creates a lot more volatility for your management team, and particularly your city manager. I think many times people get elected in that type of election thinking that they've been elected by some type of mandate. That could or could not be true, but you can have wide swings of change when there's a majority that goes out in one election. Of course, we were all elected in that. As the mayor mentioned, that's happened 3 times, twice when all 5 members were replaced in new positions. We have one person, the mayor has experience, but we're all in new positions. And so, and it also leads to the potential of, being, I like the idea of it taking more than one election to change out a majority, because I think that allows for more consistency in your governance and more, we talk, when you get elected, you could say, well, here's why I get elected. But I guarantee you, if you ask 10 voters why they voted, you're going to get 11 different answers. I mean, it's really hard to say, well, here's the reason why I got voted. And I think that making that transition smoother without necessarily changing out a majority on that short a basis, I think is something that could that be a benefit? Is that a better way to go? I will be extremely interested in hearing about where we are on being forced to go to district voting. I have yet to see a government that has gone from at-large to single-member districts and governing gets better. I don't think that exists. So I'll be interested to see if that's something that we're forced to do. Boy, I would have really pause about doing that. I don't think that's a better form of government. So I just think the consistency, being able to, and there are people on both sides that would say one thing about when you can change out a majority in one election, our outside influence is going to have extreme influence on that election. If it takes 2 elections, it just takes a lot more work. If people are trying, it smooths out the process and balances it more. The other thing, and I don't know whether I'll ask Brian this question, but the runoff requirement, is that a state requirement or a charter requirement?
runoff requirement.
That we have runoffs.
Yes, that's an election code.
It's a Texas, so we cannot switch to plurality? And so nobody in Texas does plurality?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I would have to do research on that. So.
Okay, let's do research on that. I'm just interested in that. And I ask only the reason why when you look at, when you look at runoffs, and there'll be, and again, if this is something that we can't consider, then it's moot at this point. But, if it's something that's possible just to be able to discuss, runoffs have been around for a long time, mainly in certain states that runoffs were established for certain political goals many decades ago. To be able to do that. But, there's a question on voter turnout. There's a question on election costs. There's a question on, elections can change in a runoff, but how often do they do? And really, you look at voter turnout. I mean, the voter turnout in runoffs, you talk about the voice of the people. Usually the lead running candidate will get more votes in the regular election than they will in the runoff. So I don't know if that's under our purview. If it is, it might be something that we can review. I thought there were other communities in the state of Texas that might be doing plurality voting, but I don't know the answer to that. So if you could get the answer to that. But I just think from that standpoint of, leveling out the consistency and smoothness of council, terms, those types of things, and getting, and any other suggestions that would help on that to provide some more consistency and smoothness in transition and council leadership. I do have a couple of other issues, but I don't think that they're really charter-oriented, so I think they may be governance. So I'll just wait until we maybe get to that point, if that's fine with you.
Yes, sir. Real good.
Mayor,
So,
if I may, I'm sorry
Yes,
to
sir.
interrupt you, but I want to make sure that it's every 2 years. It's not 3 years. The moratorium in the state of Texas is 2 years if you amend any
Okay.
part of your charter. That comes out of the Constitution.
So just for anybody watching online, city attorney restated the moratorium is every 2 years, not every 3 years per state law.
I didn't say, I mean, when she said 3 years, I wasn't sure about that. But remember, I practiced in Oklahoma and
Sure.
New Mexico too. So I went back and checked the Constitution. It is 2 years.
Okay, so to just restate, you have a successful amendment of any part of your charter.
That's correct.
Prevents you from amending the charter again for 2 years.
Correct.
Okay, so we will continue with the direction of look for things that fall outside of guidance of state law and do those updates in governance and ends. Anything else you got on that,
That's it.
sir?
Sorry
Okay.
to apologize for interrupting.
No, I think that's good to catch it up. To go back to Councilman Simpson, I do need to define maybe what I heard from you because you didn't list them specifically. So you are in favor of 2 additional council based on the research that you're requesting of the potential of having to go to a single-member district, which you would be opposed to in any form.
I would be, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And then 4-year staggered terms.
Well, I would say staggered terms. I'm not saying they have to be a 3 or 4, but I think staggered terms is something that we need to look at. 3-year terms would allow either a 5 or 7 member to not have a change of a majority in one election. Again, that would be a goal that I would like to see considered, is that it takes 2 elections to vote that. So if you have, but that would probably generally require a 3-year term. I don't think a 4-year term could work. I might not be able to do the math, but yes, looking at that.
Okay. And then we would want to come back to you guys. And do you mind to paint a picture here, verbalize what we're talking about in this math problem? So assuming that you stayed at 5 and you tried to stagger those terms to 3 years, can you discuss how that keeps you in an election every year versus 4 years? Can you also discuss how you would get into that, meaning you would have to leave 2 council for 2 years and then, put the other ones up as a 3, and how many years of duration does it take before you get consistent where everybody is staggered at that point?
Paula, did you want to weigh in on that? Shauna, did you want to weigh in on that?
I think it would take 6 years. I do want, if I can, go back to 2 years for a minute. I think the strongest argument against 2-year terms is that if you want staff to be the ones running the city, that's the way to do it. Because the shorter your term, the more you have to rely on staff to get things done. And the more you won't have the advantage of knowing what the staff is doing because you're very busy running for office. That's okay if you have a great city manager. You get one bad city manager and you're in trouble. So that's one of my arguments against 2-year terms is if the public really wants to have their representation come from the council and not from staff, they need to consider 4-year terms.
Very well, Shauna. Anything you'd like to add to that, Al?
No, I would generally agree with that. And then, Shauna, in terms of Mayor's question about if you can provide a little bit more thoughts about that 6-year transition so that the mayor and council understand what you understand. Yeah.
So if you have 5 council members, I don't know how many elections you can do because I think you have in even years, I'm assuming there's elections in November every even year, and your elections are in May. So your council elections would be every 2 years. So in my opinion, you could put 2 people forward for the 3-year terms. And then maybe you could put 3 people forward for the 3-year terms. But one of the issues is you can't change the term in a current term. So in other words, if you went right now to 3-year terms, it wouldn't affect you until you came up to run for office again, is how I understand it. But I think that's something really for the city attorney to explain.
3-year terms or 4-year terms?
3 years. Even on 4-year terms, if you sat right now and you decided that seats 1, 2, and 3, that they're going to go for 4-year terms first or whatever, they come up to election first. Until that election occurs, it doesn't count. In other words, you can't make it go backwards. It has to be prospective. So it takes longer when you begin to get to transition into the staggered terms.
So that's very helpful. I would like to put forth a few scenarios, not in directing anything as this is what's going to be best or this is better or worse, but just in the way in which it works out so that we don't look back 5 years from now and say, man, why did the council not think through that, to where a 3-year term is now an odd year, even year election. You have the May versus November, pros and cons. So in a presidential election, now you have everybody up in November, or some and some not. And then would you ever have the issue of, well, we're running in May and in November? So like there's the 3-year math problem is pretty complex, really, to get your mind around it. The benefits of a 3-year versus a 4-year, to me, really aren't there. So as a citizen, if I'm voting for you and I know you can get into our government policies and you can direct staff and you're going to have that vote for 3 years, I don't feel like there's any less risk in the 3 versus the 4. So I think because it provides for continuity to have longer terms, it does a lot of things on the pros side. I'd be in favor of 4-year terms as council. I would balance that with 2 years on the mayor's side. I think that as the mayor, you know what you're getting into. You should. You have a much heavier workload. You have a ton of spokesperson obligations and just more call on your time. And so I think that the additional fatigue in campaigning every 2 years is warranted because of the additional authority that comes with that. And so I think it balances the rest of council. Plus, I like having a mayor that is balanced with council. I don't like the mayor being super heavy any more than I want a city manager that is so heavy-handed that council really is just ceremonial and symbolic. And so what we're trying to do overall, I think, is put those checks and balances in. I would stagger the terms on 4 years, and I would be in favor of adding the additional 2 places, especially if we get some good guidance, legal guidance back that says, hey, this is a concern, but it's never happened. Nobody's ever had to do it. And we ran your demographics, and it sure looks like there's no way to draw a district. The population's scattered and diverse already. We're fairly represented well across the city. We don't have these pockets that we used to have back in 1960. And so if we can alleviate a lot of that, then I think we avoid the issue of having this very strenuous conversation over what single-member districts can do negatively to a council. So putting forward my request would be to add 2 additional council members, and then to put those 2 additional positions on 4 years, and then take the other, keeping the mayor at 2 and keeping the other 2, or I guess put 1 forward that would run a 4-year, and then I'll let everybody else that's going to run transition later. So the other 3, so you'd have 4 elected 4-year positions if this passed in November, meaning in May that you would have 2 open positions on this dais that are going to hold 4-year terms. So that's pretty powerful. It's pretty influential position to be running for, I would think. And then how we work out that math problem, I would rely heavily on the committee to be able to run that and say, okay, well, what if we stay at 5? What does that look like if you keep the mayor and then we stagger these 2 this year and then we wait 2 years and stagger the other 2? And now are we within 2.5, 3 years of full staggered term? Shauna, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yes. You can put them all up for election in your next election. But when you do, you elect some for 2 years and you elect some for 4 years. And then when the ones that get 2 years, when they come up again, then they go to 4 years. So that way your terms are staggered. So they start, I've seen this done by drawing lots where you have, let's say you have a 5-member council and they're going to have to put seats up for election. And so they don't want to be unfair to those who are only going to get 2 years the first time around, so they just do it by drawing lots.
Okay. I think that's something we could definitely have a good discussion with the committee on. And then the clarification you're given is really good. I understand that we would put this amendment in November, and it's going to affect everything prospectively moving forward. However, in May, you have some that didn't get affected and some that did. And we would allocate that either in, drawing straws, or we would just work out place 1 and 3 versus 2 and 4, however that works. The other thing that I do like the opportunity to do here is to put forward the appointment by council for the city attorney. I think that the benefit, and I would like y'all's feedback. I feel like that's more common than not. I think most cities have the city attorney that works at the will of council, not at the will of the city management. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and in many ways it's preferable. At least from my view as a former city manager, it was preferable to have a peer that was appointed by the city council, so that together we had to work together on an equal basis to advance the policy direction of the council, rather than have it be a supervisor subordinate relationship with the city city attorney and the city manager. I've seen that work, and it's awkward. I think it's better when you have 2 charter officers under the direction of the council working in partnership to advance council direction in a legally and, ethically responsible manner.
Very well said. I appreciate that. Ms. Shauna, did you have anything else on any of my recommendations or issues on those?
No, other than to say I agree with Al about the mayor, about the city attorney.
Okay.
It's very important to me that the city attorney report to the council, even as a former city manager.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I think the only real consideration that I would like to go back to is just the way in which we're talking about staggered terms being presented. So let me get your advisement from the consultants. If you put this proposition forward as an extension from 2 to 4, which would be more extreme than 2 to 3, and a staggered term, then it could fail wholly. If you put this forward in 2 propositions, you could still have staggered terms on 2 years, but you got to run every year. And so you would write that separately, and it looks so messy and convoluted. I feel like you got to put the 2 together, because it's really the best way forward, and you kind of have to sell it, and you got to commit fully to it. But is there any advisement from you that you would say, yeah, you need the staggered terms whether you stay 2, 3, 4, whatever you go to?
My opinion is you need the staggered terms when you go to 4 years, but at 2 years, no, never staggered terms. Even though you could have a complete turnover, it would just be too much chaos to have your city running an election every single year. It would make your organization too political.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the caution in that, and I think it pushes me more towards the need to go to a 4-year term, and I would try to push the citizens to hear us say there's a big balance and a weight that balances that if you keep your mayor at 2 years, in my opinion. Anything from our consultant team here before we move on to item C here, which is the role of our council subcommittee?
Mayor, I do have.
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, so Ryan, in the state of Texas, we can have election every year as long as it's either in May or November.
That is correct.
So the 3-year option is doable. In other words, state law does not prohibit us from doing that.
No.
Yeah. I don't know. One thing I think we need to be very careful of, and one thing I would, and I think we've all got our, things that we say, well, we've been thinking through this, and, I have something that I kind of like. But I think as a council, we need to keep 100% open minds and let this group of 10 people who are going to dedicate their time vet all these issues and come back to us with it. And, because if we, if I say, well, if you say, hey, I'm going to go 4, I'm not going to go any other way. No, I'm going to go 3, I'm not going to go any other way. Well, these people are wasting their time. And so I think it's just important that, hopefully that we give them the authority and power to really go through these issues, because they're going to spend a lot more time on it than even, we have, and make sure that we're keeping an open mind. I appreciate that as well. But I think, it's a major decision. These are major things. And then, the other thing is, and I don't know whether the committee, how the committee may fall on this, or the commission, or where it is, but then, you got to help people to educate the public about this. And if people think it's a good idea, they've got to get out there and spread the word. I don't know, and this may be something that, I know on bond issues and certain things, we're limited. I don't know whether we're limited on charter, but in all this, putting it together, you got to think about, well, not only what's good for our community and the charter, but what do the citizens, what do we feel like that they would be comfortable with? Because to do all this work and put all these great changes together, and it's set up to fail because there's too many issues, or we don't have people that are really supporting this in the community, I think would be something that we just need to keep in mind as well.
Let's get clarification on that from city attorney as well. Is there any limitation on council, because this is a proposition as an amendment, that prevents council from advocating for one or against?
Yeah, you can't advocate for a proposition.
So it doesn't matter whether it's a dollar issue, like a tax bond, an increase, or if it's an amendment to the, so we would be limited in, these are the facts. Now, at this point, as the dais, this is our opportunity to say, well, I'm in favor of, and you can stand behind any of your statements. But what you're saying is the active promotion, is that how that's defined?
That is correct.
Okay. Any questions on that, council? That's a new one for us. Okay.
One other thing I'd like to add, just a consideration. Remember that currently, because you only have 2-year terms, this council has an ability to appoint someone if there was ever a vacancy. If you increase it past 2 years, election law now controls, and you would have to have an election.
Yep.
I'm not advocating either way, just making sure you understand that that is an element. If you change anything above 2 years, that will be something that will have to happen too in the charter. So.
Questions on that from council? No.
Let me ask again. I'm going to go back to my 3 years. Not that I'm going to be, but if you change to 3 years, you say, or you look at these changes 6 years. But did I miss something? I mean, can you, for one election, say we're going to elect? Say you had 7 people that were running. Can you then have an election where maybe one person is running for a 1-year term, 2-year term, 3-year term? I'm not saying that's ideal, but is that or I just want to make sure that whether the options, if you're when you transition to a new system, on whether that initial term may be abbreviated, or there may be different time links to then get everybody on the same time frame.
If you stagger the terms, that's what will happen is when you pass a charter amendment, this body has to take an action that puts it basically in an ordinance that allows those changes to occur. When that happens, just like Sharon has already shared with you, you can stagger the terms so that by drawing lots, you can abbreviate terms so that those staggers work.
Okay.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a very legitimate and, like I said, very standard way to do it. So.
Okay, a lot of consideration. I'm looking forward to the committee and those guys taking the reins. And then, Councilman Simpson, I think your advisement is well received. We know what we think we know, and we're going to continue to listen to everybody. And this is a good conversation to have in the public and with the committee. So if we don't have any...
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Mayor, sorry to interrupt. I think Shauna had one additional item just to share with the council.
Yes, before you move on, I want to say this about 3-year terms. When you have council people running for 3-year terms, one time they're going to run in May, and then the next term they're going to, I don't know, I guess they'd all run in May and some of them would all run in November. I'm not sure how you would do this. But there's 2 problems here. One is the city has to be able to contract with the county to conduct the elections. And it's going to be very difficult to do that if you have an election every single year. In fact, there's a good chance the county won't do that, and it'll cost the city a lot of money. So you may want to ask your staff to do a cost estimate for that. And then secondly, there are different constituencies in May than there are in November. And we know this because we just worked with Beverly Hills. And the big concern there was the mayor of Beverly Hills saying that when the city elections were standalone, not combined with November elections, there was a constituency that knew about the city, that went to the polls because they cared about the city, etc. When they were forced to go to November elections, yes, there was a greater turnout, but there wasn't necessarily a greater number of people voting in that race because there was a fall off on the ballot. So overall greater turnout, not necessarily as many people voting in that race. And they felt a real kind of an estrangement from their constituency when this happened.
So I appreciate the additional information there, and I think, to put a number to it, if you had 40,000 people show up to vote for a presidential election, you were seeing a fall off on the ballot where maybe only the same 15 to 20,000 voters voted on the city propositions or the city place. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, and there are people who will come out for a national federal election who will not come out for city elections. So when they do come out, they're not interested. They may vote. They're not educated. But when you have a city election, specifically the voters are there to vote for the city. They're paying attention to the issues. They're people who have been invested probably all along.
Mm-hmm. Council, you guys have anything to add or questions on that before we move forward?
No, sir.
I think we hear what you're saying, Ms. Shauna. We appreciate the additional discussion. I'm going to move us along on to item C here since we've accomplished B, role of City Council Subcommittee. So we have two members here that have nominated and volunteered. Councilman Sherlin, place 3, Councilman Simpson, place 4. Anything that we need to do, Ms. City Secretary, further on this item on your end for staff?
Not for staff, no, Mayor.
Okay, so then it would just be council. Councilman Sherlin, Simpson, do you guys have any questions in the way in which you want to help direct and sit on this committee with these citizens?
Well, no, I do have a couple of questions as it relates to
Okay.
that. Well, one is, can we be sure, I guess, when we notify these people and that that they've been officially approved, that we send them a link to this video? Because I think it would be very important. We have one person here that's going to serve, but for them to be able to kind of see the discussion and kind of what's going on. I guess my other question is, I'm assuming these meetings will be open to the public? Okay. Will they be, and one thing I would just like to do, just kind of like this one, and if we can set it up in a situation, is it required to be open to the public?
It is not, and when we went through this process in 2020, they were not public meetings.
Okay, well then
So
let's
that would be something that y'all could discuss. If we want to go a different direction, we'd be happy to facilitate that.
Right. Any reason as to why it wasn't open to the public?
I honestly don't know. We did it by Zoom back then. We had 2 council committee members and then the 9 members of that committee. And I would lean to Al or Shauna maybe on their experience and expertise on what they might recommend on those meetings.
I would open it to the public
Agreed.
because that's who your stakeholders are.
Yeah. And then maybe also that we can arrange in a setting where it could also, just like this meeting, be available by video, so that people that can't attend physically could be able to watch the meeting and or go back and watch other meetings as well.
Yes.
Let's get a little point of clarity on that. So it's open to the public. So mayor and 2 other council members attend. Can I get my city attorney to weigh in on that?
I guess I don't understand the question.
Well, the question would be, we have a quorum at that point. It's a notice public meeting. We know what we're discussing. Is there anything that prevents the mayor from attending this because he's not on the subcommittee?
Yes, that would mean it's a quorum and you have to post it.
Okay, so we've posted it as a public meeting.
Clarification, it's posted for a quorum of the city council as a public meeting.
So we would have to, and Brian, help keep me honest here, we'd have to post an actual agenda, because if you're discussing city
Got you.
business at it, it's not just a notice of possible quorum.
Okay, so I think knowing that that is open to the public, not open to the other council members, we're able to, which is a very good point, Les. You televise this; it's linked in. We're able to watch and learn, and it's not. Well, we've got to catch up at the last meeting, and we weren't able to follow along. So I like the direction we're going. Anybody see any issues, especially from our consultants, on how we're directing that?
No issues.
So then, I mean, although not required, we would put out an agenda for what is going to be discussed at the meeting. I mean, even though not required, I think it would be good just in transparency to have an agenda, which I guess, we'd work with them to have that.
Yes, the subcommittee working with staff and the consultant, we can prepare.
And then just to remain, so it's just a thing, I mean, if we just put out the associated quorum notice with the potential that every meeting, then if you decide at the last minute you want to come, it's notified or whatever. If you don't, I mean, but the precaution, we don't have to say, okay, who's going to be here, who's not, if we just put out the potential quorum notice for council each week.
Well, we don't have one council member here, so I don't want to speak for him. But if the other three understand we could watch and not attend, then it does prevent any city business from taking place, and it probably allows the committee to feel a little more autonomous.
Okay.
And not quite as micromanaged. So I'm only proposing that as a potential thing that could happen, not as something I'm in favor of. So I would actually like for the other three council to not attend it, but I wanted to clarify if it was a legal prevention that kept us from going.
And if I can clarify for you, Councilmember Simpson, under the Open Meetings Act, because city business would be discussed, it's not a notice of possible quorum. We'd actually have to post a council agenda, similar to a work session one, very broad, but we'd have to do something like that if we had a quorum in attendance.
That's not difficult,
So-
it's just a matter of doing it.
No,
right?
we can facilitate it if that's how y'all want to move. I just want to make sure that you understand that difference.
Thank you.
So let me get my other council members here to weigh in on, we're going to work without a notice of quorum.
That was my question. I want clarification because what I'm understanding, Councilmember Simpson, he believes we are posting a quorum.
Well,
And
what I said was, Tom and I'll be there. If somebody else wants to come, then we have
Yeah.
to do that. But I guess it would be up to the three of y'all to try again. But if the mayor feels, and I would agree, I mean, you can watch it or whatever, and it's probably just good for the two of us to be there. But just thinking through the possibilities so we don't come up at the last minute and say, well, wait a minute, I might like to go, but
Right.
we're too late for the quorum or it doesn't get posted.
Right. And I heard you say you're okay with this.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I can watch online and let y'all do your work.
Great. I think we're good to proceed the way we've directed it here. So no notice of quorum prevents you as staff from having to put forth the agenda. However, consultants will have a working agenda for the subcommittee and for the committee members.
Thank you.
Anything else on that, Mr. Hartman? No other questions, right?
Not for me.
Okay. And
One other question. So will we put the agenda out for the public with the rest of our agendas, and will we give a notice of this meeting where we have the rest of the notices on the city website? So if people want to attend, they can go to the place that we always have all the notices.
We will be happy to publicize that. They won't be on our boards and commissions website, since this is an informal committee, but we can do it under our public notices part of the website, or we could do it on your mayor and council page to bring some sort of publicity to it. So we can work through that with you, Councilmember Simpson, on what you're comfortable with and make sure that we publicize it out there so everyone knows.
Is there any reason why we couldn't put it on the board's page as well?
I'd have to look toward Brian. I think we'd have to formalize that committee, and then we would run agendas and minutes through it. It would be a public committee at that point, and pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, we could put it on that website.
Based on the way it's described, that's what I would do.
Okay.
This description, this thought process that we're having right now, that would be the best way.
Well, I just think any avenue, the more that we can have to let people know what's going on, the better. So whatever we can do, that we can do that doesn't violate the law, I'm
Absolutely.
fine with.
Okay. Thank you.
anything else, Councilman? Charlie?
I'm good.
Okay.
That's covered.
It's just having you here. I just want to give you an opportunity. You're listening to what's going on. You've been asked to participate. We're excited to have you. Is there anything that you are looking at going, well, I don't understand, or this isn't real clear? Are you following along? Do you like the direction as a citizen being asked to participate? Anything you would change up to this point?
I like the fact that you're willing to do transparency for the citizens.
Uh-huh.
That's so important. I think the last time that we did this, or that, when was that, 2020,
2020.
2020, being on Zoom, citizens didn't know why we're behind you guys is because you have worked so hard for that to be a part of your reign.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you lending a little bit of guidance, encouragement, or confirmation to it. So, to our consulting team, anything on the way that we've laid this out? I think we've got our roles properly aligned, and I think unless you guys have anything else, we've got a good direction.
I think we are understanding of the council's framework of interests, and I think as the city secretary said at the beginning, the first committee meeting would be May 30th, and then would clip along every week with envisioned end date of July or June 27th, and then come to council July 9th with its recommendation. So we're going to be working very diligently with the citizens on the committee and the subcommittee members to move forward on evaluating and bringing forward recommendations or amendments.
Mayor, I got one more question I'd like to ask our consultants here. Do you know, so obviously you're going to talk about the recommendations that will be coming up, and this group will come up with them. Do you talk about setting these up for success? In other words, you talked about, hey, let's don't overload with a whole lot, so, let's don't have 20 on there. It's best to have a few there. But do you talk about the need for building community support and all that type of thing, and what needs to happen as well with the Charter Commission?
Yes, and I'll let Shauna weigh in a little bit on that as well.
Yes, in fact, one of the things I was thinking about is this measure more likely to be approved in November or in May. So, yeah, we think about that. We think about making sure that there's a limited number of proposed amendments, that they are in line with each other, and that they are clear. So you may put 4-year staggered terms as one item, 7-member council as another item, and then maybe one other item. So that's one of the things we would discuss with the committee, what they think. They understand the voters better than we do because we're not from Amarillo, so we get their advice on that.
Thank you.
Okay, we did go ahead and just briefly touch on the committee schedule, so let's confirm that, Ms. City Secretary. Do you mind giving us those dates and times one more time?
Absolutely. They will start on May 30th, which is a Thursday at 5:30 p.m., and then we'll go every Thursday through June 27th.
And what is the location of that meeting?
That's going to be at City Hall. We don't have an exact location. We're hoping to do room 105, which has big screens in there, and I do believe we could we'll be running virtual options for the committee members as well. So that way, if they can't be in person, they can join virtually, and we can record and broadcast that so that we can share that with the public. If we can't do it live in that moment, we can absolutely put it on the website right after. And so we'll work with IT to make sure we can do that, but I believe 105 of City Hall will probably be our best location.
Okay, very well. Moving forward. Appreciate you guys on everything you've worked on for us so far on that. We look forward to working with you guys at Baker Tilly. To maximize our time here together today and to get our money's worth, we want to go to item C, governance and ends policies. So we had a review back in March. We did go page by page on this one. We went line by line almost, I think, by the time we had flipped back and forth through it. You guys have a copy of that with the notice changes. If you've had time to review that, I would like to start with you guys as our consultants. I think council has weighed in as much as we probably feel equipped to, and I think if we're doing anything, we're just asking for an outsider opinion to look over our shoulder and tell us, is this normal? These are good practices. Is this in line with kind of what you see? Or do you have any recommendations on this package?
Thank you, Mayor. So Shauna and I did review the March 26th markup that this council undertook and prepared. We have some thoughts for sure, but we would be ill-equipped to provide you with any meaningful recommendations today, given the brevity of time we've had to really think through. What I'll say on a big picture, there's a lot of goodness that is in your governance and ends policies that we like. The conversation that we had today, for instance, where there's dimensions of the charter when they are not in sync with state law, we can craft provisions in your governance and ends policies so that that is an additive, a value add for you all to consider, so that and we can do this in consultation with yourselves and the interim city manager, city attorney, and the city secretary to make sure that a rhythm of bringing back to you a fresh update on the provisions of the charter that may not be in sync with state law, so there is a transparency and awareness of where the city's deferring to state law rather than the charter. So there's things like that that we will be recommending as best practices. Plus, Shauna and Stephanie have been working together on looking at comparison cities, and we'll review governance and ends policies for best practices out of some other cities that you may want to consider, as well as just from our experience. So we'd rather not shoot from the hip right now. We'd rather be thoughtful to bring back some best practices and some recommendations for this council to consider that are well-founded.
So while we've got you here, just briefly, and I appreciate that, and I didn't have an expectation that we would maybe go back through this document and hand it over as a final draft. I think we have an expectation of we want to start a discussion with you. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to see if council had any specifics that they wanted you to key in on. And if not, then I think we would want to let you work with staff on maybe when fits your schedule for us to receive your recommendations. If that looks like a follow-up meeting, because we have it tailored in a way where it's simple enough that we could spend an hour talking through it and we'd be good to go. If it's not, the way in which that gets sent to each individual council member as another option. And then we would schedule either a follow-up conversation during a meeting or we would just move forward with staff recommendation. So do you have anything other than that you want to lend to it, Al, before I ask council if they've got anything specific?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Council, do you have anything specific that you want to direct the consultants to on this document?
I do, Mayor, if I could just have just a second.
Yes, sir.
And a couple of topics I want to discuss, and may or may fall under the governance and ends, or again, maybe I don't know if this is a charter issue. But the first one is, as I went back and looked through the document, I think I see the word transparent in there one time. I don't know if I see it in others, and we've kind of talked about this. But I would be interested in knowing other communities, what do they have in their governance and ends policies that relates to the standard of transparency that they're going to have with the public? I'll give you an example that concerns me, and we tried to address it, but I don't think we've reached a solution, which is when council and the public for the first time hear about an issue that may be major, a major expenditure, not $50,000, but millions of dollars, and it's brought forth, to the public as an action item, and in the first meeting, it's presented and council has to vote on it. That to me, that's not a whole lot of transparency. Now, I know that we can't put every single item that we have on the budget twice. I'm sure people would say it would bog it down. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But I do have a concern when issues like that are brought up. My hope had been that a rolling agenda might help with that. However, we just had a recent thing that was put on the agenda, spending millions and millions of dollars for infrastructure on a project. And the project's great. It's not that a problem with the project, but it went back to, again, where a major expenditure of millions of dollars was only presented to the public and council one time for action. After it was approved, and people began asking questions. And none of us claim to be the smartest person in the world. If we were, we wouldn't be on city council. So there's lots of people out there that are going to know more about things. And I think giving that transparency to the public, even only 2 weeks, I had hoped the rolling agenda would cover that. But in this instance, on the rolling agenda, this issue that people now have questions about, details were never given out on the rolling agenda. It had the item on there, but it said a placeholder. And so I just think it's imperative, and I've talked with the interim city manager about that, because I wish, as a watchdog of the citizens, I had said, hey, I don't have a problem. Let's walk through this and not go so fast. And again, and what the public is then going to say is, well, this reminds me of what happened a couple years ago when there were some legal opinions that said you could use money for a specific purpose. It got put through, and then it just does not. We need to continue to build trust with the community. So to me, anything, we're about to be a new building. I heard that in all the meetings room there should be audio visual. We should have recordings of all of our public meetings available to the public. So I would just be interested in anything that would lead to what things in our policies can we put in place that would lead to transparency. I don't know if you have anything to add, because I do have one other topic I wanted to add, but that's one thing I'd like to look at that I don't think is really clearly spelled out in our current governance and ends policies. Good. The second is, and I've got a question, again, it goes back to, and this is kind of fiduciary financial responsibility. And I guess maybe this was something that, and I don't know, would come up with in the governance and ends policies. I don't know if it's a charter issue. But, Brian, the $50,000, so, and correct me if I'm wrong, we approve a budget each year. Council does. It's our responsibility to approve that budget, and we were required to basically approve all the expenses of the city. That's a requirement that council has, and that's in the charter. Is that correct, Brian?
Well, that's part of state law.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then any item that's above $50,000 has to come back to council for approval, even if it's been budgeted. Is that correct?
I think that's a good, generally speaking, I would agree with that.
And is that a policy or a state law requirement?
Well, state law does come into it in light of the procurement code, because there's a limit under the procurement code. But for other things, I think the general practice has always been that anything 50,000 or more will come to council. So.
And so that's a policy then?
Yes.
Okay. So, but it's not in the governance and ends, but where is that policy written?
I think at one time it was in the operational provisions. We'd have to dust them off, but that's always what I've understood, that it came from those policies that were set 20 years ago or so.
And I mean, although redundant, why is that in there again? I mean, what was the purpose of us having to approve it again?
I don't know. I would have to look it up to understand why they put those in place.
Lloyd, what would you say? I'm just kind of, I'm not. I think it's a good thing, but I just wondered, what was the premise of why that policy's been in place?
So historically, as being here a while, that actually was adjusted. That policy was actually adjusted a few years ago when state law allowed it to go from 25,000 to 50,000. So there was, but that discussion is basically on the efficiency and volume of those contracts moving forward, timely. Typically, they're time-sensitive, small contracts that need to proceed timely for the benefit. It's just a standard throughout our Texas, as I understand it, that this type of policy exists for efficiency within operations of this type of government.
But I guess it's a check and balance to make
Yes.
sure, even if it's been approved in the budget, that the elected officials have one more time to look at it before
Yes.
it's approved. And then anything that comes up that's not in the budget, but comes back to us if it's over that $50,000, that if it's not budgeted, because don't we do budget amendments?
There are budget amendments for certain criteria. Remember, there are categories within our budget, like professional services, where we project those, or legal services, where we project those services. They're not line itemed out because some of those are unknown prior to the start of the budget year. So the best example I have that the working budget was passed without having specific line items to identify that. There are professional services identified based off historical need and use and understanding goals and objectives in professional services that are required. Engineering goes through those contracts and is charged to those projects. We have legal services. Sometimes they're known, sometimes they're unknown, but we project those in that budget typically.
But if an item for $50,000 or more is not budgeted, it has to come back to council for approval?
Yes, and in that we identify the funding source and that adjustment to the budget. And sometimes that's just adjusted in the final budget amendment. Sometimes it's adjusted immediately depending on the magnitude of the impact and what's going on. But we bring that funding source for that line item to council of how that's funded if it wasn't a budgeted item.
Okay, so on the policy on expenses is, even if it's in the budget, if there's a change of if it's 50,000 or more or not budgeted, it has to come back to council.
Yes.
And even if someone is under budget, say they're $75,000 under their budget, but they want to spend $50,000, they're not free to do that. They have to come back to us to do that.
Well, there is a provision in the governance ends, and all our policies are put together where city manager has the authority to do minor adjustments to the budget.
And minor as in under 50,000?
Under 50,000 has been historically how that's viewed.
Okay. So there's a check and balance in that expense through the city manager and above a certain limit with
Yes.
council.
Those adjustments require some, at a certain level, require certain city manager. Now, a $100 adjustment, a department head can do that. Okay.
Understood that.
Understand, that's what that statement meant. $100, a department head can make that adjustment.
Well, the reason why, and I guess the reason is we're elected as officials, there's a check and balance to make sure we're spending the money appropriately.
Yes.
And we don't get into the weeds on things, but you have your discretion even on this contract. You said, hey, it may be under 50,000, but as a discretion to keep council informed and do play. You weren't required to put the Baker Tilly thing on there for 40, but you did it just as a courtesy. So you have the judgment to be able, or the city manager does,
Exactly.
to do that. Well, the reason why I asked that question is because it seems like on the expense side we have very, there's checks and balances on a couple of places. But then when we get to the personnel side and salaries and expenses that are associated with that, which is about 34% of our budget. I mean, we spend, I think, $170 million a year. What I understand is that once we approve a lump sum, anything in there can be changed, whatever the city manager wants to do without council approval, as long as you don't. So you can create positions, you could do away with departments, you could shift all types of things, but as long as you stay within that budgeted framework, there's no additional checks and balance on those changes similar to other expenses.
Historically, there's been a lot more latitude for city manager for the personnel within the existing budget.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I can see that. I just wonder if that's a policy that we may need to look at too.
We'd be glad to look at it if that's the council's choice.
Okay. And again, just like the other, again, I know that there's a certain, but obviously to me, if there's a check and balance system on the expenses on the expense side, but really on the personnel side, there's no check and balance once we approve.
Well, minimal at best, checks and balances.
Okay. I just think I would like to be able to clarify that in this and say, and we don't want to bog things down, but creating 5 new positions or, adding X amount to personnel or those types of things. I think just like anything else, if we're managing, the cost side on this side and we're part of that representing the public to make sure their expenses are managed. But over here on the personnel side, we really don't have any say over it. I think, finding a balance of that for us to be able to do that was something I'd like to maybe get clarified in the governance and ends policy.
Councilmember, just a little clarification. This starts with governance and ends. Some of that goes into financial policies. There's some other policies that exist that are related to it, but it starts with governance and ends. And I'll let the consultants weigh in too if they have comments on that. But there are other policies that are at play once you get past governance and ends and how that relates. Financial policies being one of those. Okay,
thank you.
I got a question.
Councilman Kraft, you got a question, and then
Yeah.
we'll go back to our consultant.
Floyd, this may be for you. Just shoot me in the right direction on this one. So we're talking, you stated earlier about financial policy. I know in the charter it talks about our bonds as well. So what would it look like to, whether that's it may be financial, it may be governance ends, or it may be the charter, but anytime we do a bond election, or in those propositions, just to be frank with you, I don't want different propositions doing different things that's going to end up derailing the whole project. So, for instance, like if we do a street bond and the drainage and different things are inside different bonds and those end up failing, that's going to obviously affect the street bond itself.
The structure of that is the responsibility of the city manager. It'd be my responsibility to bring that forward with staff's input to make sure that doesn't occur. And we know that's a direction of this. It can be looked at and identified. It starts in governance ends to make sure that we're meeting policy direction from that, but it goes into the financial policies. Laura, are you aware of any direct policy in the financial policies that deal with structure of bonds? Okay, so we're talking an area where we may need to look at adding some policy somewhere, whether it's in governance ends, financial policies, or others. But to give that direction, that the objective is you don't want projects approved that can't be constructed, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So that's good, Councilman. To go back to our consultants here, just to give you good direction, more clarification, I think we are looking at some language that we would like to get some advisement from you and your firm on maybe bond language requirements that require more specificity to what those bonds are going to do, where the monies are going to go, the amount of time that we have to spend those monies, et cetera. And then the way in which they are grouped or separated from other bonds that would be part of the same project, so that we wouldn't end up with a past street bond and a failed drainage bond, and you cannot perform the street project because the drainage didn't get approved, yet staff is held with funding for one and not for the other. Does that make good sense to you guys? Do you see the direction we're trying to go with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then back over on personnel versus expense in our budget, there is some latitude in this governance and ends policy that says that city manager can use reasonable judgment and take action in more or less working within a given budget that's approved. And we see that happening on the personnel side, and I think that that council is looking for more required language that brings that back through council for the check and the balance system, still allowing the city manager full reign to run the city, make recommendations, place these things, but then an approval, advise and consent, much like our charter says. Questions on that?
No, that makes sense. The whole matter of position control, and the related budget makes perfect sense, and we'll work with the city management team to clarify that.
Real good. On my list here, review, issues and changes, identified additional issues and changes, and then our schedule. So have we covered everything from council? Anything else you'd like to identify for our consultants?
Mayor, I did have a comment from Councilmember Tibbs.
Oh, yes, sir. Go right ahead.
So the issue he would like to be looked at and codified is the city manager's report be mandatory to all council at the minimum of once a week. Okay. The city manager's job performance will be largely based on communication, but he feels this requirement provides a level of accountability for the city manager.
Real good. So we'll make sure the consultants work on that one as well as a recommendation. Knowing that we are moving forward with, let's say, June workshops, July recommendations coming back from our consultants and our committee, can you weigh in, Al, on schedule? Do you feel like that's a good time for us to capture both governance and ends and charter together? Would you like to separate those in July?
My gut is telling me it'll be a good time to bring them both back together, and we'll figure out the cadence with Floyd and Stephanie, and we'll consult with yourself. But yeah, I think everything will jive up pretty well and sync up pretty well for that July timeframe to bring both back.
Okay. And then I would just ask if you guys want to try to tackle the vision mission statement in the same month, same meeting, or do you want to look at that as a total separate project, and we could take that kind of depending on how the progress goes on this other item?
I think we'll focus, and we're totally open to any suggestions, but we'll focus on the charter and the governance and ends policies. But what we may do is concurrently, because I know we wanted to do some interviews with council members to get your input on the mission and vision statement. So we'll talk to Floyd and Stephanie about maybe having a concurrent layer where we're organizing some interviews with each of you to get your thoughts on the mission and vision. And because we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we'll chip away at that as well, but bring it all back in July or August for you.
Real good. Anything else on schedule from council or staff? Any additional considerations from council or staff that we need to cover here today? I don't see any. So Al, Shauna, you guys have been great to get started with. I know we're just getting the process going. We look forward to working with you guys. Is there anything else that you need us to consider here today?
I don't believe so.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've had a pretty productive meeting with you guys. We look forward to turning you loose with a strong committee. And then we're available as needed. As you know, the staff will contribute on anything that you present to them. And then we'll wait to hear back from you guys. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
With nothing further on this agenda, I'm going to ask for a motion and we'll adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn this meeting.
Motion and a second. We're adjourned. Thank you guys for being here.